The cigarette was slowly burning in his hand as he took a sip of beer. Matt loved his wife, truly, but sometimes, she could be too much. Their relationship started in high school, and they married after a few years of dating. They were happy and getting along quite well most of the time, but there were days when Olivia picked up a fight for no reason, and today was one of those days. After a long day at work, Matt was looking forward to going home and spending the evening with his wife. When he got home, Olivia was in the kitchen making dinner. He walked over and gave her a big kiss on the cheek. However, she pulled away from her husband and continued slicing the vegetables. Matt asked her what was wrong, and she said nothing. So he decided to go upstairs and take a shower. He was almost undressed when Olivia entered the room. "You don't care about me anymore?" she asked. Matt was surprised and asked his wife what that was supposed to mean. She told him that instead of asking her what was wrong, he left her in the kitchen without saying a word. He looked at his wife and told her he did ask, but she did not answer. Therefore, he decided not to bother her with any more questions. He assumed that she would come talk to him when she was ready. Olivia started crying and kept saying that her husband did not care about her anymore. Matt did not know what to do because he had no idea what was happening. He did nothing wrong. He did ask his wife what was wrong, and here she is now acting as if he ignored her. Matt knew that today was one of those days, one of the bad days. He sat down next to his wife and hugged her. Again, Olivia pulled away. Matt repeated the question from earlier. He wanted to know what was wrong. However, he knew that on a day like this, usually nothing is wrong, but his wife tends to make him feel like it is. They sat there in silence, and Matt headed to the shower. When he returned to the room, Olivia was still sitting on the bed, staring at her husband. "I would like you to sleep on the couch tonight," she said. He still had no idea what he did wrong, but he knew that a fight would break out if he said anything. Matt knew that his wife would return to being her old self the following day again. Matt remembered the time he met his wife as he was sitting on the porch with a cigarette and a bottle of beer. They were madly in love. They enjoyed each other's company and knew they wanted to spend the rest of their lives together. But with each quarrel, Matt felt the rift between them getting bigger and bigger. He was afraid they would one day end up on the opposite sides of this rift. The following day, Matt went to work before his wife woke up. He hated mornings like this and just wanted to be out of the house in case the quarrel from yesterday continued. He was sitting on a bench in the park during lunchtime when his phone rang. It was just another spam email, an invitation to join Tinder. He wanted to delete the message as he did many times before. However, he could not bring himself to do it. So he downloaded the application and created a profile instead of deleting it. It was a quiet day at the office, so Matt spent most of his day on his new app. He made a fake profile with a fake picture and a fake name. After a few hours of swiping left and right, he realized it was late and it was time to call it a day. He did not want to go home because he had no idea what was waiting for him. However, Olivia was in a perfect mood when he came home, and he knew yesterday's events were already forgotten. But Matt could not just forget. At least once a month a day like this happens, and it was becoming too much for him. Every time he tried to talk to his wife, she pulled away. No matter how hard he tried, he felt like she was drifting away from him. Everything started when they learned they would probably never have children. They have been trying for a very long time and have seen many specialists, and the answer was always the same. After a while, they decided not to see any more doctors because it was all just too exhausting. They kept hoping and praying for a miracle, but it never happened. Matt could not sleep that night. He was lying in bed, looking at his wife. She looked so peaceful and so beautiful. Suddenly, he felt remorse and guilt over the fact that there was a dating app on his phone. He decided that he would delete it tomorrow when he comes to work. He promised Olivia when he married her, through good and evil, until the end. Things at work were crazy the next day. Matt barely found the time to drink his morning coffee when he arrived. However, everything was resolved by lunch, so he decided to go to the park and have his lunch there. He sat down on the bench and took his phone out of his pocket, intending to delete the app. But the curiosity got the best of him. He thought to himself that he would take one last look. His sandwich almost got stuck in his throat when he saw the picture. It was Olivia. Matt's hands were shaking. His heart started beating faster, and he could not believe what he saw. His wife had a profile on Tinder. He felt so guilty last night, determined to delete this app, and now he discovered that his wife was secretly Tindering for who knows how long? Matt was shocked. Is his wife cheating on him? Is this the reason for her strange behavior? When he got home, Matt did not know what to do or say. He loved his wife and wanted to make their marriage work, but it looked like she was ready to move on. He realized that it would be better just to rip the Band-Aid off. "How long have you been cheating on me?" he asked his wife during dinner. Olivia was surprised to hear this question. "Are you kidding me? What kind of question is that?" she asked. It was too late to take the question back, so Matt told his wife that he knew she was cheating because he saw her profile on Tinder. Olivia looked at him in disbelief and asked him how he could see her profile on Tinder since he did not have it. Matt knew that he was in trouble, but he did not care. His wife had the profile on Tinder first. It was good that he made a profile too, because who knows when or if he would find out that his wife was cheating on him. Olivia told her husband that she had never used Tinder in her life. She had no idea how it worked. She did not need a dating app profile, and she could not believe that he would accuse her of something like that. However, Matt found it hard to believe his wife since the evidence was there. It was her name and picture. Olivia realized that it was tough for her husband to believe her, especially given that she has been putting him through tough times lately. Matt wanted to believe his wife. He knew that she was not a liar, and despite their quarrels, he had a hard time believing that she would go and cheat on him. And since Olivia had no idea what his fake profile looked like, Matt decided to contact her through his phony profile. The reply came quickly. He was in the middle of his meeting when he heard his phone vibrate, and so the conversation began. Matt did not want to lose too much time proving his wife's infidelity, so he invited Olivia for a drink later that night. Surprisingly, she accepted the invitation. Matt called his wife to let her know he was working late and told her that she had plans anyway. This answer made Matt even more suspicious. He was nervous when he approached the bar. Not knowing what would happen, Matt sat down. He ordered a beer, and while waiting for Olivia to come, he could not stop remembering his good moments with his wife. He could not believe she could move on and forget their wedding vows. After an hour of waiting, Matt was convinced that nobody was coming. A familiar face approached the table as he was about to stand up and leave. It was Hannah, Olivia's friend from high school. "What are you doing here all alone? Where is Olivia?" she asked. Matt replied that he was having a one-on-one evening with himself because sometimes a man needs that. He asked Hannah what she was doing there, and he was pretty surprised when she told him she was waiting for her Tinder date, but he never showed. Matt was curious, so he asked if this often happens because he could not believe that a person would just let another person wait. Hannah told him this happens quite often. However, this Gary guy sounded solid. "So the name of the guy you were supposed to meet is Gary?" he asked. Hannah nodded, told him to have a good evening, and then she left. Matt was sitting there and felt like his head was about to explode. The name he chose for himself on his fake profile was Gary. When he came home, Olivia was still out, so he decided to wait for her. Matt had no idea what was going on and could not think of why Hannah would create a fake profile for Olivia. He was lost in his thoughts and did not even hear his wife come in. Matt told her to sit down, and then he told her everything that happened that night. Olivia just sat there, and she looked at him in disbelief. "Why would Hannah go and do something like this?" she asked. Matt had no idea what to say because he knew that Olivia and Hannah had been friends for a very long time. After a long conversation, Matt and Olivia decided it was time for the truth. So, they got into their car and drove to Hannah's place. She had no idea what was happening when she opened her front door. Matt decided he was done listening to lies, so he just asked Hannah about her motive. "Why would you create a profile on Tinder for Olivia when you know she's happily married?" This was an unexpected question for Hannah. Olivia realized that Matt was right about Hannah when she saw her face. She did this. Olivia then remembered all those conversations she had had with Hannah. She was always quick to judge Matt. When she looked back, Olivia realized that most of the quarrels she had with her husband happened on days that Hannah visited her. In the beginning, she found it strange that Hannah always sided with her and always talked terribly about Matt. However, she was one of her closest friends, so her job was to be supportive. "You never liked Matt, did you?" Olivia asked. The couple was shocked when they heard Hannah's answer. It appeared that Hannah was secretly in love with Olivia. For years, she said nothing. She just watched from a distance, wishing she were in Matt's place. After a while, she could not take it anymore. She decided it was time for Olivia to be hers. So every time she visited, Hannah put ideas into Olivia's head, causing quarrels between the couple. Creating Olivia's profile was just the last drop to tip the bucket. She wanted Matt to leave his wife over infidelity, and then her shoulder would be the one Olivia would cry on. However, her plan did not work. If anything, this experience brought the couple even closer. She closed her eyes as she let the pain set in, trying fruitlessly to hold back the tears that threatened to fall from her face. She has to concentrate on not crying out loud as she remembers her late mother's words. "Think of all the bright places, and you won't need to cry." She tried to think of ice cream, but was distracted by another heavy laugh from her cousin Ella, bringing her back to reality. This time, she lets the tears fall heavy. Her auntie's last sentence is something she never wants to hear again. She watched as Ella ran inside with glee, coming back with a bucket of cold water, always joyful to see her suffer. Her hatred for her started immediately after being introduced to the family as her cousin. Since then, she has promised to make her life a living hell. She hurriedly got up, shaking as her auntie ordered. She did not want to enact her anger further. She commanded to pour the water on her body. Ella smiled as she gladly obeyed her mother. This has become an everyday ritual, as she stopped flogging her, but has discovered other ways of reminding her how useless her life is with just words. She laid on the cold, bare floor for 30 minutes before she dragged her ragged self to the girls' room on the command of her auntie, crouched at her favorite position behind the door where she consoled herself. Ella came in and ignored her as she went to dress for school. With her head sunk between her knees, she hastily looks up at the sound of Ella telling her mum how beautiful and well-equipped her new school was. "And who do you expect to pack those clothes? You had better get up now before I descend on you again." She hurriedly brushed past her and began folding the clothes she washed yesterday. "You should be ashamed of yourself. Do you see your mate going to elementary school at this age?" She hissed and went inside. The tears on her face had dried up as she finished folding the clothes on the table. "My name is Jade Adams, the only daughter of Luke and Linda Adams. I am an orphan living with my auntie and cousin." These words are the first thing she learned how to spell and pronounce. She opened her wardrobe, and the fleet of mosquitoes seemed to be her enemy at that point. She vented her anger toward them by killing as much as possible and forgetting her sorrow. When the rest had managed to escape, she looked down at the rags she called clothes, all jumbled up and messy. She looked at Ella's side of the bed, tidy as always. Her auntie had rather beat her every day for her tardiness than teach her how to fold them. Having no idea what to wear, she poured all her clothes onto the floor, looking for something nice that could at least cover all the marks on her body. She went on with her morning duties of washing, scrubbing, and mopping the floor. "It is not my fault that I am too old for elementary school," she thought within herself after losing her parents at an early age. Life became a nightmare as she moved from one orphanage home to another. She sighed and sat down, leaning on the bed only Ella slept on. "I once used to sleep on a bed like this before my parents died," she said. "I wish they didn't travel, leaving me alone. Maybe if I had gone with them that fateful day, the death that took them away would have taken her too. Is it not better to die with them than to be alive and subjected to this mockery?" Her father, Mr. Luke Adams, was one of the best painters in a small village in North Idaho. He was a good man who devoted his time to his work and family, trying everything possible to provide for his lovely young wife and their only child. She can still remember how her mother met her father, as they have told this story repeatedly. They attended the same community church and volunteered to help the needy in their community. When her father introduced her mother to his parents, it was unsurprising to both families as they had patiently waited for them to do so. The marriage was a small gathering where they invited close relatives of both families to rejoice with them. Life for the two lovebirds was a bed of roses as things were moving on fine. When Jade was born, her father promised to send her to the best school, as he was not privileged to live out his dreams. Maybe through why, he said, I can finally accomplish that. He then told her of his dream to become a neurosurgeon. She immediately promised him that she would help bring that dream to reality, since her dreams are also to become a neurosurgeon. The death of her parents later scattered those dreams. The driver was here. Her auntie screamed at Ella, "Finish your food in the next 5 minutes, or you are going to school with an empty stomach." As she began dishing food into her plate, she has been starving for the past 2 days because she mistakenly burnt her auntie's gown. She looked up to her auntie, expecting to see sympathy in her eyes. Maybe she would pity her and give her some food to sedate her rumbling stomach. She frowned as 2 slices of bread fell onto her plate. "You should be lucky I gave you something to eat, as I don't want you to die on us, because if you do, who will be cleaning and doing the house chores?" Before the death of her parents on her 5th birthday, she had wished for a long life, a beautiful house with 2 brothers and sisters. Maybe the wish fairies are sleeping, as she can't remember her wishes being granted. She went to the bedside shelf in the room. It contains most of her stuff, so she practically calls it her own. Ella hardly sleeps in the room with her. She prefers sleeping with her mom, but mostly comes to the room to dress up, or occasionally, when they are friends for a few seconds, chats with her. She pulled out the case containing her undies and brought out an old family album containing the pictures of her mom, her dad, and the life she once knew. She glanced through the photos, especially the one taken on her 5th birthday. With tears in her eyes, she promised to make them proud. As lonely as she was, she has this soothing feeling whenever she glances through the album, as she reminisces on the life she once had and thinks of the one she wishes to have. "Jade," her auntie called. As she hurriedly went to answer her, "You decided to keep me waiting." She shook her head vigorously. "No, Ma." She pointed to the chair beside her. "Wash these clothes and iron them very well. If you like, burn them. Ella and I are traveling tomorrow for an important occasion in New York. I need them thoroughly ironed." She hurriedly washed the clothes and spread them to dry. The following day, after her auntie and Ella left, she went over to Williams, as she could not wait to share the great news with him. Williams is an orphan like her, but unlike her, he is privileged because the family that adopted him is childless, so he is well taken care of. Williams has been her secret tutor since he found out that she has a passion for school and is always impressed by how an intelligent girl like her has been denied the privilege of going to school. She told him the news of her auntie traveling to New York with her daughter. Months ago, Williams helped her register for a scholarship program organized by his school for the less privileged children who can't afford primary education. The scholarship scheme covers from elementary education to the university stage. With the help of his mother, a high school teacher, William could narrow out the type of questions they would be asked during the exam, helping her master each question. She has been giving her very best, knowing fully well her future and the chance of her leaving the hellhole that faith has brought her solely depends on whether she succeeds. She became more focused and utilized every opportunity she got to practice and solve every quiz Williams gave her. Her auntie traveling for a few days gave her an edge over the situation as she fully dedicated time to study. On many occasions, Williams has asked her about the relationship between her and her auntie. She has not been able to give him any detailed information as to how she was related to her, because whenever she asked her auntie if it was her father or mother, she was told to, it always ends with silence, as her auntie has to refuse to explain to her who she was related to. All she could remember was being one day in the office of the miss, the lady in charge of the 3rd orphanage she was staying after the death of her parents. When she got to the office, she met her auntie, who claimed to be related to her, with a picture of her parents and her smiling happily. She hurriedly followed her, thinking that her life would change, She saw her parents smiling happily with her, but she never knew that she would be treated as though she was still in the orphanage. Jade kept counting every hour of the day until the competition day. Having prepared herself well, she prayed to God and reminded her guardian angel to help her succeed, as her future depended on her passing this scholarship exam. She had been consoling herself with the success story since Williams told her about the scholarship. She came to the exam venue in the company of Williams, who kept reminding her to have faith in herself, as he was very confident she would be among the selected candidates. A few months after she took the scholarship exam, life returned to how it was before. Her auntie continued with her behavior, and Ella was hers. Every day without hearing from the school, she keeps losing the small hope she has been holding on to. 8 months after the exam and a new academic session had begun, the school pasted the names of the selected candidates. Williams, on seeing her name boldly written as number 3, couldn't wait for the school to dismiss. He packed his books inside his bag at the sound of the bell and ran home as fast as his legs could carry him. With joy in his heart on seeing her, he screamed her name at the top of his voice. "Jade! Jade! Jade!" he screamed. She ran over to him, asking why he was running like something was after his life, getting closer to him. He saw the cheeky smile he was trying very hard to hide on his face, and immediately she knew that the scholarship result was out. "Did I get selected?" she asked him. "Yes," he answered, nodding his head. Hot tears rolled down her eyes immediately after he confirmed what she already knew in her heart. When Jade got home, she met staff from Williams' school, sent by the scholarship board, already discussing with her auntie. He came to inform Jade that she was among the selected candidates and will be joining them immediately. He apologized for the delay in pasting names and communicating with all the selected candidates. They had a hard time choosing the best candidate for the opportunity. He further explained what the scholarship program covers: her tuition fee from elementary and high school to university, accommodation, and a certain amount of money every month. Also, upon successful graduating from university with good grades, a well-paid job will be waiting for her. Jade couldn't be more grateful to God for answering her prayers and to Williams for helping her succeed. With her bags fully packed immediately, she bid her auntie and Ella farewell and promised to check up on them whenever she could afford it. Even though they mistreated her, she told herself, "I have promised not to allow their attitude towards me to reshape my life and future." She closed her eyes as they drove past her auntie's house, remembering her late mother's words and wishing both her parents were here to share in her joy. Grandma Agnes loved to look out the window at an old tree that grew nearby. The older woman mentally talked about her problems to her and shared her pain and memories of the past years. It seemed to her that the tree heard her stories and even answered, quietly shaking its thin branches. Grandma Agnes ended up in a nursing home recently when her youngest son had an accident at work and was injured. Her son became disabled and moved in a wheelchair. Her daughter-in-law refused to look after her, referring to the fact that she already had enough work. Agnes did not complain. The nursing home suited her needs, and the food was average. It was just dull. There was no one to talk to. The residents were mostly bedridden patients. They did not have time to talk to her. Yes, and everyone had the same goal: to get rid of this hard life as soon as possible. When you lie bedridden, you are spoon-fed, and strangers serve the table. There is no time for talking. Agnes was more fortunate than others. She could walk by herself and often went to the hospital park. In the garden, Agnes approached her beloved birch tree and quietly whispered to her about her problems. The tree, in response, poured fine snow on her, as if it was sheltering her from all problems. Relatives often came to other residents, brought homemade food, and took them out for walking. And there was no one coming to Agnes. Her younger son could barely move in a wheelchair, and the eldest one had long lived with his family abroad, and there were no letters from him. Life in the nursing home flowed monotonously and quietly. Some died and were taken to cemetery. Other older adults came to their place to live out their last days here, homesick in silence and loneliness. But one day, everything changed. There was a noise at night. Everyone was running along the corridors, shouting, stomping. Agnes could not understand anything when she heard the long-forgotten word, war. She remembered the war. She was 4 years old, and her family lived in the countryside. Her father was taken to the war immediately, and her mother, with 2 children and grandma, stayed home. Her mother and grandma decided to leave when the war came very close, and the bombshells began to fly right into the yard. Agnes remembered this hard road for the rest of her life. She had to walk for a long time and then travel by train for several days. There were many strange and angry people around, and little Agnes was always afraid and crying. Her mother would calm the girl, but her fear would not go away. During the evacuation, the family settled in a distant village with some other elderly people. They ate what they had to. They wanted to eat constantly. And when all this horror was over, they had to travel by train for a long time and then get to their house on foot. Only their house was no longer there, and the village was gone. Everything was burned down. Her mother made the only right decision and moved with the children to a small town. Agnes lived there all her life, married, gave birth to 2 sons, and buried her husband in a small cemetery. And now the war had come again. The nurses were shouting that everyone needed to be evacuated urgently. Buses arrived in the morning. All the bedridden patients were loaded on stretchers and taken away. And those who could move independently were told to pack their things and wait for the next bus. The older adults waited long in the lobby for someone to come for them. But that was in vain. No one else arrived for them. Continuous explosions were heard in the distance. The elderly went to their rooms and began to calm down a little when the continuous sirens were heard again, and everyone was sent to the shelter. That was the place of a large and dirty basement under the building. The sirens were not to be heard from there, but the place was freezing and damp. It smelled of mice and cat urine. Most of all, older adults were afraid of the unknown. It was unclear who was bombing, why the rockets were flying around, and what was happening at all. Soon a nurse came down to the basement and brought warm blankets, water, and food. She answered questions unequivocally, saying that she did not know anything, and that battles were going on somewhere nearby, and explosions and shootings were heard. Thus passed the first night of the war. Many older adults prayed in the basement and asked God for mercy and protection. One of the women became sick. The nurse brought her medicine. The explosions were already audible to everyone, meaning the front was approaching. Agnes and other older adults had to sit in that damp basement for 2 weeks. Of the entire service staff, only a few nurses and a watchman remained with them. They helped the elderly in any way they could. At nights, the watchman would go to the food warehouse, which was located nearby, and bring food. They got a kerosene stove from somewhere, and they cooked simple food on it. The water in the basement dripped from the water pipe. It helped to survive, but it was freezing and damp. The days dragged on for a long time. The uncertainty weighed heavily, and explosions and the roar of shots were still heard above. Many older adults had coughing and choking attacks from dampness. There were no medicines. They poured hot water into plastic bottles and hid them under their clothes. They could warm up a bit that way. Young nurses brought their children to the basement where the older adults hid, so they would not be left alone at home. So they all lived together. Grandmas told fairy tales to children, and children played their games. Time passed, but help did not come. After another trip for groceries, the watchman did not return back. The nurses said that a shell fragment had hit him. Now the nurses began to go for groceries, but they said there was very little food left, and soon everything should end. Agnes could not understand who attacked the quiet, peaceful city, which has always been famous for its hospitality, and from the whispers of the nurses, Agnes realized that the war was arranged by a neighboring friendly country, which was considered fraternal. Her amazement knew no bounds. Something was wrong with them. This country could not act that way. It cannot be. They messed up something there. But everything turned out to be the bitter truth. The neighboring state where her relatives lived, where she and her mother were once evacuated and hiding from the enemy invaders, is now bombing her hometown, smashing everything around and pouring fire on peaceful houses. What the heck was happening to this world? Agnes began to pray to God and ask him her questions quietly. She did not pray for herself, but her heart ached for her sons. One lived in a suburban village and was utterly helpless in his wheelchair. The other disappeared abroad, and Agnes knew nothing about him. Another week had passed. Finally, the basement doors opened, and the nurses said everything was over and they could go out. When Agnes went out into the street, the bright sunlight blinded her eyes. She had to cover them with her hand. Being accustomed to the light, Agnes turned to her favorite tree and could not see it. Instead of a large, beautiful tree, there was a giant funnel. The nursing home building survived, only there were practically no windows. But the neighboring houses were all destroyed. Tanks with incomprehensible signs were moving along the street. Agnes had never seen such a sign. Agnes decided that she was too old to understand anything. Maybe someone threatened them, but she didn't know anything about it. It was no longer necessary. Their main issue was to finally see the sun and go to sleep in their beds. There were no glasses left or heating in the building, so the windows were boarded up with sheets of plywood. The bed was dry but cold. A few days later, a bus with a red cross came, and they were told that everyone was being taken to a safe place. Agnes, along with other older adults, took one last look at the nursing home, which was no longer a cozy haven, and went to the bus. They were given hot tea on the bus, fed lunch, and assisted those who needed it. They drove for a long time, the whole night. It was hot on the bus. Agnes finally warmed up after the damp basement and got some sleep. But thoughts of her sons haunted her. How were they? Did they manage to escape? Was there a place for them to live? All these questions faded into the background. Only the pain in her heart for the fate of loved ones did not give her rest. Agnes asked God to help, protect, preserve, and let her see her children, whose life scattered over different countries. Finally, the bus stopped. It was a checkpoint, but the military guys did not check anything with the older adults, and the bus went on. They were being taken somewhere, and no one knew where. Everyone was happy with hot food and a warm bus. At another stop, everyone began to leave the bus with their belongings. Agnes saw a large railway station and a train where older adults were put in front of her. The carriages were reserved seats and were very warm. Agnes managed to settle down on the bottom bunk. She didn't hear anything else. She just fell into a deep sleep. The train traveled for a long time without stopping. The windows were closed with blackouts and artificial lighting lit the car. At a long stop, customs officers came in, checked their documents, and the train moved on. Finally, the older adults were told to get out on the platform after several long travel days. Agnes went outside and sipped the warm spring air with pleasure. All around, there was a riot of young greenery and flowering trees. Agnes did not notice how the warm spring came, only the trees differed slightly from her hometown. Agnes looked at the station building and gasped. The sign was written in an unfamiliar language to her. What's happening? Why were they taken abroad? How could she find her sons now? These questions kept popping up in her head. Agnes and all the refugees were led into the waiting room. Quilted mattresses lay right on the floor. Agnes found a free bed and, exhausted, lay down on it. The journey tired the older woman. Volunteers fed everyone with hot lunch. People were constantly moving around. It was impossible to fall asleep. She lay with her eyes closed on a bare mattress. She covered herself with a thin blanket and warmed up a little. Agnes tried not to think about what would happen next. Worrying thoughts swirled in her head, and there was a strong cough. Agnes felt weak. She was shivering. She was ill. The night passed half asleep. In the morning, all the older adults were again invited to the bus and taken somewhere. They didn't drive long. After 4 hours, everyone was dropped off near a luxurious building. After a short check-in, the older adults were taken to their homes. It was another nursing home for the elderly, but how beautiful it was. Luxurious crystal chandeliers were hanging in the lobby. Underfloor heating pleasantly warmed their senile feet. The staff was polite and attentive. The room was clean and comfortable. There was a TV, but the programs were in a foreign language. The cleaning lady told Agnes they were in another country's nursing home. Agnes was utterly sad. How will she find her sons now? Grandma couldn't think of anything else. She did not want to eat. It became difficult to get out of bed, and a strong cough overcame her. She did not want to go out. Nothing pleased her. Her roommate was also in bed all the time. The arduous journey, which lasted several days in a row, completely took away the strength of the older adults. Grandma Agnes was not pleased with anything, and a strong cough kept overcoming her. The thought that she would have to die in a foreign land and her children may never find her grave was incredibly depressing. She wanted to return back to her home, but there was nothing left except ashes. Agnes often remembered her favorite tree sitting next to the window, with which she liked to talk all the time. Gradually, life began to leave a tired, frail body. The nurse noticed Agnes's poor condition and called the doctor. The doctor examined her and prescribed a treatment. Agnes was spoon-fed, but she didn't feel like eating. Where were her sons now? How were they doing? Especially her soul hurt for the youngest son because he was utterly helpless in his wheelchair. A few more days passed. Agnes began to recover. Her strength returned, but she did not want to live. Grandma was constantly crying and praying to God for her children. If only they were all right. She had no other desires. Her neighbor died one night and quietly left this life while dreaming. Agnes was left alone in the room. The older woman looked sadly out the window. There were many trees in the park, but they were unfamiliar to her. Suddenly, at the end of the alley, Agnes saw her tree. It was a miracle. The tree was similar to the one Agnes had spoken to at home when she lived in the nursing home. Agnes put on a warm blouse and went outside. This tree beckoned her with its shadow. There was a small carved bench under the tree. The sun was shining, light clouds were rushing across the sky, and the weather was terrific. Agnes sat down on a bench and looked around. There were beautiful, well-groomed flower beds. Older adults walked along the alleys, and polite nurses accompanied them. Life went on, but the thoughts of her children never stopped haunting her. She wanted to see at least with one eye on how they were doing, hear their voice, and feel their smell. Yes, at least they would talk about themselves, Agnes thought, continuing to sit on the bench. Day after day, Agnes lived well. Her new roommate was a cheerful lady, always telling something and did not letting her get bored. She said that soon the war would end and everyone would be returned to their country. But Agnes did not want to go back. The conditions were better there, and the food was good. The only thing she would like to do was see her children. The older woman thought and sighed heavily. One day, when Agnes, as usual, was sitting on a bench under her favorite tree, she was quietly called out with a long-forgotten word. "Mom!" Agnes froze in surprise, shocked, not believing her luck. From the voice, she recognized that this was her eldest son. But how could that be? Because no one knew that Agnes lived there. Agnes looked around and froze with happiness. Yes, it was her eldest son. Only he had grown up a bit and got better. The older woman rushed to her son and pressed her whole body against him. The mother clung to her son's shirt as if she was afraid that it was a mirage, a figment of her imagination, and it would soon disappear. The son embraced her with firm, strong arms. Tears streamed from both eyes. When the first emotion subsided, Agnes asked how they managed to find her. The son told her about how he learned about the war and the evacuation of the nursing home. Agnes heard a long story about searching through all the lists of refugees. Volunteers helped him find his mother. Having learned about his mother's whereabouts, the son put aside all his tasks and immediately arrived at the nursing home. And when he saw his aged, alive mother sitting alone on the bench, his legs buckled. It turned out that her son lived in France and got married. He had a small business, and his wife and 2 wonderful children lived with him in a big house. Agnes's joy knew no bounds. She had grandchildren. The older woman did not even dare to dream of such happiness, and when her son said that he was taking her from the nursing home to his family, Agnes was embarrassed. She wanted to see her grandchildren, but she was afraid to interfere with her son's family's happiness and embarrass him. In response, the son only laughed, took his mother in his arms, and carried him to his car. The road didn't take long, it was just a few hours. When they arrived, Agnes was pleasantly surprised. In front of her, she saw a huge house that looked like a small medieval castle. A chic garden was laid out on a clean, well-groomed site. There were several fountains and many flowers. The son said his wife, Alona, loved flowers very much and took care of them herself. With trepidation, the older woman entered a large, luxurious house where her son lived. Suddenly, 2 charming kids ran out to meet her. These were her grandchildren. The children cautiously approached Agnes and stared at her with childlike curiosity. Agnes sat quietly on the couch in the hall and gently pulled the children to her. She stroked the children's heads with tears, inhaled the long-forgotten smell of babies, and could not believe in her happiness. "I am your grandma," Agnes whispered, "and I found you." The kids immediately felt like a loved one. They hugged her with their little arms and laughed merrily. Their mother, Alona, followed the children. She quietly watched the meeting of native people and smiled. Then the daughter-in-law went up to her mother-in-law and hugged the older woman. So they stood there, being strangers yesterday, and today they were such dear and beloved people. With a cheerful roar, her son entered and burst out laughing. "Well, the dampness was bread. Come on, hostess, set the table. We want to eat from the road." Alona began to fuss and immediately took her mother-in-law to her room on the first floor. The room was very comfortable. The bathroom was beautifully tiled, and the windows hung with luxurious curtains. The older woman quietly sat down on the edge of the bed and began to cry again, only this time from happiness. And soon she got another piece of good news. The younger son and his wife also managed to leave the war zone abroad and have already undergone surgery. Soon he could walk and visit her, so the whole family will gather together. Agnes went out into the luxurious garden, sat on a bench, and quietly began her prayer. Only now she thanked God that he answered her prayers, performed a miracle, and allowed her to see her sons. She had something to thank the Creator for. Instead of an unknown grave in a foreign land, Agnes was waiting for a calm, secure old age and the love of loved ones.